Thank you, Reverend Watley, for your kind and very generous introduction. As he said, my name is Carl Reed, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Society of Black Engineers, or NSBE as we call it. And I'm also a member of the Board of Directors of the Black Idea Coalition. So I'm so grateful that you decided to join us to kick off this exciting new initiative. What I'd like to do over the next few minutes is begin my remarks by introducing you to NSBE, provide you with a brief discussion about why diversity matters, then discuss why we're partnering with this effort, and finally, I'll provide some detail about the Black Inclusivity Model framework that is at the heart of the Black Idea Coalition. Now, NSBE is one of the largest student-governed associations based in the United States. It was founded in 1975 by 6 Black engineering students from the South Side of Chicago who were attending Purdue University at the time. Since then, NSBE has grown to just under 21,000 members who range from third graders to seasoned technical professionals occupying the C-suites in corporations, universities, and government agencies. Its mission is to increase the number of culturally responsible Black engineers who excel academically, succeed professionally, and positively impact the community. Now, I'm a product of the organization, having served as a chapter officer when I was an undergraduate at MIT, and as a national chair after discovering my passion to increase awareness and opportunity in engineering for underserved and underrepresented students, initially in the local Boston and Cambridge communities. Now, for 45 years, NSBE has been a trusted diversity partner for countless multinational companies, tech firms, startups, and technology-focused government agencies. Our conferences and conventions attract upwards of 14,000 participants and over 300 exhibitors to the career fair floor. However, we only represent 4.2% of the engineering degrees awarded, and just 3.6% of all engineers in the workforce in the United States. Clearly, more has to be done, and that's why we're here. But why is all this important? Well, because diversity matters. There is mounting evidence that demonstrates that organizations with diverse leadership have better financial returns, higher employee satisfaction and retention, and are much more innovative. For instance, a recent study by the Boston Consulting Group of 1,700 companies in 8 countries found that companies with above average diversity on their management teams report higher innovation revenues by 19 percentage points than those with below average leadership diversity. Now, why is this the case? Because innovation is born from the intersection of concepts, ideas, disciplines, and cultures. Author Franz Johansson calls this the Medici effect. Now, early in the year, in addition to our publications, our conferences, workshops, and talks with universities to help them increase the success of Black engineers, we began to receive requests from our corporate partners as well for strategies to create more inclusive workplaces. In other words, to move from a diversity conversation to an inclusion conversation. Now, some of our partners had great success getting Black talent into the door, hiring them right out of college, for example, but they were having difficulty retaining them. Many left the company after just a few years, if that. Now, our partners learned an important lesson. Fostering diversity was an important first step, but diversity is not inclusion. And that's what a McKinsey report found in 2020. In Diversity Wins, How Inclusion Matters, they write what we all know. Hiring diverse talent isn't enough. It's the experience they have in the workplace that shapes whether they remain and thrive. You know, Dr. Robert Sellers, the Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Michigan, offers this metaphor. He says, diversity is being invited to the party. Equity means everyone gets a dance. But inclusion, everyone contributes to the playlist. Now, I know there are many variants to this metaphor, but the message is clear. Creating inclusive workplaces and communities is the goal, and diversity is a means to that end. I like how OSU's Kirwan Institute defines inclusion. They write, inclusion requires this simultaneous experience of feeling valued for your uniqueness and having a sense of belonging on your team. Now, NSBE's exemplary industry partners like Intel, Northrop Grumman, and Dell have achieved a great deal of success hiring, but they're also successful at retaining and promoting Black engineers. These companies are intentional and proactive about fostering a culture of inclusion. In other words, they share the playlist. By having tough conversations, institutionalized training, and building into their personnel policies systems to both incentivize inclusion and penalize intolerant behaviors. Now, the floodgates of requests for partnerships opened for us after a police officer put his knee on the neck and killed George Floyd on May 25th. As you know, protests sprung up in Minneapolis and Washington, D.C., and all across the United States and around the world, not just demanding an end to police brutality, but also calling for the dismantling of the symbols, practices, and funding that reinforce systemic racism in all aspects of our society. After the first few weeks of this initial national reckoning on race, I began to ask the question, what next? What can we as a country do beyond protests to effect lasting change? What can industry, schools, government, and communities do to root out institutional racist policies and practices that have blocked the education, advancement, and success of Black people in every sector? Public commitments to social justice are an important first step, but what was needed was a strategic approach that transforms organization systems to produce lasting structural change that can achieve Black equity internally, in the broader communities in which they operate, and their networks of influence. After all, it was management expert Sir Edward Deming who said, every system is perfectly aligned or perfectly designed to produce the results it gets. Therefore, to change the results, we must change the systems that are producing it. There needed to be a framework, a list of recommendations or demands or practices that companies and other groups can follow, a roadmap to turn their pledges into practice. It turned out my pastor, Matthew Watley, and his wife, Shauna Watley, were having the same conversation. What can we do to affect systems change? How can we operationalize this moment to help organizations turn their pledges into practice? Subsequent conversations with him gave birth to the Black Idea Coalition. Now, the foundation of the Black Idea Coalition's work is the Black Inclusivity Model, which provides a framework to achieve equitable workplaces along 4 dimensions underscored by data. Now, allow me to drill down on each of these components to share more details. Diversity. Achieving representative parity for Blacks at all levels and across the mainstream business units of an organization, and ensuring an inclusive board of directors. By representative parity, it's reflecting the representation of Blacks in the communities in which the company or organization operates. In terms of equity, it's benchmarking and identifying disparities on key employment metrics such as recruitment and offers, hiring, compensation, tenure, promotions, bonuses, EOC complaints, departures and terminations, and auditing policies and procedures to surface and eliminate systemic racism, such as how new employees are recruited, and then redressing any gaps that are arisen from the climate surveys. In terms of inclusion, that's the playlist. The company-wide climate surveys not only are conducted, but the results are distributed widely. And compulsory implicit bias and anti-racist training. We're looking at regular company-wide town hall conversations about race hosted by the CEO, and establishing or increasing the funding for Black employee resource groups, and ensuring that they all get executive champions. In terms of the ecosystems, looking at the number of Black-owned suppliers and contractors, focusing and pooling investments in corporate responsibility in K-12 and STEM education in under-resourced communities, and looking at the policy agenda that the company is undertaking that ensures that you're reducing structural barriers for Black communities, students, and workers. And of course, examining sponsorships, much like FedEx did with the recent Washington football team. And then finally, making sure data are actionable and available, defining metrics to track and benchmark the success and progress toward DEI inclusion, creating dashboards and reporting DEI data and progress against equity targets. And this is key, linking these efforts to financial results and corporate mission. To the last point, as management expert Peter Drucker said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Now, as an engineer, this quote really appeals to me. Many DEI efforts fail because they're tied to a charismatic leader with no staff, no budget, or no buy-in, or they're driven by feel-good movements that fade with the emotion or political winds of the time. One critical reason why we know this effort will have the transformative impact we expect is that it's undergirded with data. In other words, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And we have a powerful data analytics partner, Canaries.